Okay, so now let's talk about a restriction. Okay? It could be mild or severe, depending on what kind it could be. It could be mild restriction or a huge restriction, severe. So what's going to happen here when we restrict the system? Okay, normally the restrictions will happen around the liquid line or the suction line, with the lines getting kinked, or your metering device is starting to get stuck, or it's getting restricted. It could be water in the system. It's turned ice in the metering device. Whatever the restriction could be. So let's say we start putting a restriction right here. Now, we're going to have less refrigerant going into our evaporator coil, but it's going to start backing up some in the liquid line. So automatically, you could have higher head pressure. But on this side of the restriction, the more severe it is, the greater the head pressure could go up. Your low side pressure, is you cut off the amount of refrigerant going to the low side, like a garden hose, water coming out, the low side pressure is going to go down. In fact, your restriction, like a all the way closed valve or a kinked copper tubing or a completely clogged or restricted liquid line dryer, could mean what? It could mean that it's so great as the compressor's suction, it could go into a vacuum. It could go into a vacuum. Now, if you're not feeding this coil with the amount of refrigerant it's supposed to have, the pressure in it's going to go down. And a restriction could lead to this freezing up. So one cause of a frozen coil is a restriction. Now, one place you can always find a restriction is look for a temperature difference across something. If you think the tubing's kinked, you can usually see it bent. But what if it's a liquid line dryer? On the dryer, you shouldn't have a hot side and a cold side. It's just a dryer on a liquid line. It shouldn't be no more than maybe 3-degree difference across it. So wherever your restriction is, you'll see a TXV half frozen or starting to freeze up on one side because of the great pressure drop through that restriction. So what happens here is you have less refrigerant going in the evaporator coil. It boils off faster. You have more vapor, and that vapor becomes superheated. Greater amount of vapor being superheated, higher superheat. Greater amount of liquid being backed up into the coil, greater amount of subcooling. So here you got increases in subcooling and superheat. Now what happens to your amps during this restriction? The amperage could, because the head pressure is going up, could start going up. And of course your delta T is going to do what? What you think the delta T is going to do? Well, as this room becomes warmer, and this could become warmer, whatever it is, you'll start to get a decrease in your delta T. We don't usually ever use delta T's to try to figure out what's wrong with a system. We're going to use this here. Okay? So those are the things that can be happening with a restriction. Okay? Any questions about that?